This is Robert Merglanche, the Mindshare Learning Report, Canada's Learning and Technology e-magazine. And welcome to This Week in Canadian EdTech, very special edition. I'm honored to have joined us for a Mindshare Learning Moment, Dr. Richard Kelly, on his new book, The Nature of Business Transformation, along with Dr. Mario Chaisson on Agile Leadership in Crisis and Beyond. A little bit of thank you for joining me this morning, gentlemen. And from afar, we've got Dr. Kelly from London, central London in the UK, and Dr. Mario Chaisson in Moncton, New Brunswick. A little bit about Dr. Kelly is an author and independent leadership specialist who has spent over 25 years with inspirational and successful leaders in both the private and public sector. He's also the author of Constructing Leadership 4.0, Swarm Leadership and the Fourth Industrial Revolution. And Dr. Chaisson is a notable name in Canada. He's with the Franco and Sud School Division, who leads there as Director of Innovation, Research, and Strategy in transforming that district and province. He's part of the C21 CIO Alliance, past chair, and completed a fascinating PhD. More recently, traveling the world and understanding how successful organizations lead. Gentlemen, I hope you and your families are healthy and well.
Yes, thank you, Robert.
Yes, it is, yeah, so far.
Dr. Kelly, we've been through one of the most transformational periods in modern times. We're talking about now in crisis and beyond. Hopefully it's an endemic upon us, but we seem to have all fallen victim to this, and it translates to a bit of a flu bug, not too severe for me anyway. So, but there's a lot to unpack here, and you came out very timely with a new book following a bestseller, The Nature of Business Transformation. It is really about courageous leadership, and that fight or flee mentality was upon us, and now, you know, it's never been more critical to be agile as we move forward. And in the notion of future proofing, education was caught off guard in a lot of ways, and I think Dr. Chaisson could attest to that. But talk to me about the inspiration of your new book.
Sure. Well, thanks for the opportunity, Robert. And very briefly, the new book really follows on from the previous book, which was really focused on leadership. And it's the how-to. It's about how can we transform organizations in order to accommodate a new idea of leadership, which is a more collective leadership. And so what the nature of business transformation is really looking at is three things. It's saying, look, traditionally, we've had leaders, and we've had strong leaders, courageous leaders, charismatic leaders. And that worked in a particular epoch, in a particular way of organizational life. But we are now approaching a new agile environment where we have to be very much more quick as organizations, and much more entrepreneurial, and much more innovative. And also, there's lots of different influences, particularly in the field of robotics, which are beginning to have quite a profound implication in organizational life, as indeed in the educational life and going forward. So what the book is exploring is how can we begin to think differently by thinking of the way we structure organizations or educational systems, the way that our relationship with technology and how that can help us, support us to become more agile, and how we can change our mindsets in order to create this more collective way of thinking. And that in itself is quite courageous. It means you step away from a traditional idea of leadership, which is to be the strong upfront leader, and you are leading, but you're leading through the swarm, through the community.
Brilliant. Dr. Chaisson, you can relate to that one. I've heard you mention the community is a school, and it's about the village, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. As you always promoted it as well. Before COVID, it's clear that the education system we're kind of struggling to respond to the need. First the student personalities and need, but also the community. So we're kind of lack of a mismatch, and it was all about the five phenomenon, which is ICT, automation, the evolution of the global economy, what space is all about, and one of them was about leadership. And that was fascinating about understanding and reading Dr. Kelly's book, because it really transformed the behavior from a charismatic, like Dr. Kelly was saying, but a lot more about creating an eco community. And that eco community is a new form of courageous leadership, like you're pointing out, and that new charisma, that new form of the leadership, of courageous leadership. It's about connectiveness. It's about connecting. It's about networking, and your platform. It's a great example of bringing people together to think together and to collaborate together and innovate together, because we've got a huge challenge in front of us from an education point of view. So, inspired by this book, we were able there to mobilize and transform the knowledge from an organization, from changing the mindset, changing the structure, and changing and bring more connectiveness. So we're a lot more responsive, from a leadership as a collective and not as an individual. So it's about the organizational need instead of the individual need within the organization. And you need this new form of leadership, kind of decentralized, for lack of a better term. But it's a great experience so far.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Fascinating. Dr. Kelly, I'd like to say it takes a digital village to raise a child in the 21st century. How does that resonate with you in terms of relatability to your book or books for that matter?
Yeah. So it links in this. Well, my book is inspired a lot by the honeybees, or the honeybee world. So the reason why it's called Swarm, the nature of business transformation, Swarm Intelligent view of business, is because I look at the honeybee world and I think about how honeybees produce action, how they function. And it's interesting that honeybees have an algorithm, and you can work out a honeybee algorithm. And in fact, a lot of clever people have done that. And that honeybee algorithm can actually be replicated into a digital sense. So really what I'm exploring in my new book is how the digital world is going to shape, in this sense, organizations, and almost certainly the educational sector as well, how the digital world is going to influence that. And what of course is interesting is that we already have digital natives. We already have a whole group of young, dynamic minds who think digitally and are in that space. So that's where Mario and I have a good connection, because Mario is looking at how to harness this energy and create, how to connect with organizations and create innovation between the digital natives and the new organization. And organizations are looking at how to connect with education to see how we can begin to shape the new generation so that it can feed into this collective digital world that we have. And that's our
fascinating. Well, I love the notion of swarm leadership, and I've heard Mario mention on a number of occasions. Who would have imagined in our modern times that 100% of educators in K-12 and higher ed would embrace technology, had form. So traditionally, when it comes to transformation of any new innovation, you have the innovators like us, you have the laggards, and you have the large bulge in the middle. How do we move forward when Dr. Steve Jordan's psychologist from U of T talks about the great snapback, where instinctively people are going back to the way it was? And you know what? Online learning was not successful. What has been the perception? So my point is, in a crisis, if it wasn't for the EdTech companies and people stepping up, there would have been zero learning, paper packages to homes. So it wasn't elegant in a crisis, online learning or blended learning for that matter. How do we move forward? Because of the resistors and the traditional
Yeah.
way of going back to the way it was. And that I challenge both of you on that one. So Dr. Kelly first.
Well, that's a really interesting perspective, and I'd be keen to hear Mario's view on this. But we are in a transition in technology. It's true, and the system that we're looking at in terms of supporting education and organizations has not traditionally been there. The tipping point, I think, has been the pandemic, because for 2 years we've had to get into this remote learning piece, and it has created this very fast track innovation to create collaborative platforms in order to facilitate, working from home. So crisis has indeed created a way forward, which people like me were advocating for 10, 20 years, to try and get people into that kind of remote space and using technology in that way. So in that sense, it's absolutely spot on. But I think this is where I get into my crystal ball stuff, because the future, I think, will solve so many of these issues. I think once we get into advanced artificial intelligence and how that can support both the workplace and education, I think we're going to be in a very different space. So I would say we're in a waiting game between for the new artificial systems to kick in order to help us. And I can talk more about that, but I'd like to pass to Mario, because I'd like to hear your perspective.
That would be over to you, Dr. Chaisson.
Yeah, very good. Yeah, to you guys both perspective is before COVID, we were struggling there from education system, and now that COVID is kind of passe, it's still there. But we're slowly adapting and adopting it as part of our culture. We can't afford to go back because we know that we were unsuccessful. So we need to redefine and redesign what is learning and what is space. So I refer to as Dr. Kelly's first chapter of a book. So we're living in a period of VUCA, which is volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. But I would add also divided, right, to his formula. So we're living in a current place that we're divided. Is that the school system, right, is kind of divided to the community. So this whole notion of changing the mindset that the community is the school, and the school is the innovative space, right? So your space that you have, Robert, right? Which is the co-working space, that's the class, that's the community. That's where you bring community members with students, post-secondaries or elementary, right, all together, because we all wake up every morning, to improve our world, and we have to do this collectively. So you need this leadership to have this better understanding of merging the school system, which is producing an innovative, entrepreneur, right, that contribute to the innovative community. So that's the whole new understanding collectively that we can. So that's why the community is the leadership, and we are part of that leadership collectively.
And how are you using technology? Sorry, Robert, how are you using technology to enable that, Mario? That's the interesting question.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, absolutely. So, and Robert and I are very fascinated about the digital technologies because it's an enabler. It provides, opportunities to connect, to collaborate. We couldn't do this right now without technology,
Mm-hmm.
to be able to share our ideas about our leadership. So the Mindshare platform allow us to be able to collectively talk, but allow people to reflect on it so they can change their behavior. That's the leverage of the power of learning. So the learning and schools are two different things. You got the physical school, but you got the digital schools, right?
Hmm.
This is the form of digital school. So absolutely, it's an amplifier, about learning. So there's no ends to this opportunity. The
Absolutely.
world can be the school.
We embrace the notion of co-working and co-learning in our community space that we're in. I hope to host you one day, Dr. Kelly, in our shopping mall co-working space, first in North America. And we are bringing in co-op students, interns. It's a true incubator of what's real and what's working out there. And when you collaborate and you have a vested interest in people's lives, and the upskilling and the relationships are so vitally important for leaders to understand. One of the critical challenges leaders have today is retention,
Yeah.
and demonstrating that their organization fits within the 21st century new normal.
Yeah.
Talk to me about that.
Yes, absolutely. It's a big challenge. So you've raised a couple of very interesting things. The first thing is, of course, is around the retention's interesting one, because people only want to work for organizations if they feel comfortable, if they feel they're growing, if they feel they can contribute. So we're in a very classic catch-22 situation here, because the organizations are, many of them pre-COVID, operated at a kind of a hierarchical, classic top-down structure, which certainly the new generation do not, much of the research supports, do not want to work in. And then on the other hand, you've got, and therefore people start, flighting around. But the question is, for the organization is, one, can you change your organization, de-hierarchize it, flatten it, in order to create an environment where people want to work? So the challenge is back in the organization, because very often the organizations put the challenge out there and they say, oh, millennials, digital natives, they can't settle. No, the organization is not creating the right environment to attract this talent. So it's an inversion of the idea. And I don't think many of the organizations even now have got that. But I think COVID has changed the game. I think COVID has made people realize, number one, that, well, the interesting thing is going back to the workplace now, because people have been doing their work with kicking their slippers off on the couch, munching marshmallows, and relaxing and doing work when they want. Now they're going to back into that environment. And the question is, are they going to return to a formal environment? Or is the environment going to meet the challenge and create the kind of culture that they have been used to for 2 years, where they feel that they can be quite innovative and themselves? And I think this is the big question for all organizations to do.
And it really speaks to, the theme of your book around swarm intelligent approach to reinventing organizations, because we're at the reinvention point. And if you're not reinventing and paying attention to the emerging needs of your teams, organizations will cease to exist.
Yes, indeed. In their current forms, they will cease to exist, or they will just have a talent drain. And then we will be in this future scenario of constantly having freelancers, and which could be the answer. It may be that we will be a future world of just freelancers. But I think you're right. We are at a critical point where organizations have to reinvent, or they have to adapt to the idea of what do they do to resource what they need in order for their work.
Just to throw another wrench into the equation, when it comes to education, it's all about relatability in the market that we serve, is that some 30% of educators are choosing to leave the field, the profession. So that adds another layer of complexity. When it comes to retention, you're just not getting the professionals that want to come into the field. And is this a convergence? Is this where chaos meets opportunity because of the emergence of online learning and blended learning, the hybrid learning solutions?
Yeah,
Dr. Chaisson.
I'll talk about two things. I'll talk from industry, and after that, I'll talk from education. So from an industry point of view, what we realized in that before COVID is that our organization really want to have engaged people within the organization, like passionate, right? Okay, this great communicator, great collaborator, and great problem solver, but collectively, right? It seems to be that there's a lot of literature is looking for that. So during the COVID, all those essential staff becoming itinerant staff, right? Okay, and learn how to adjust, adapt, and adopt working from home. So they have a new sense of well-being, being productive and efficient, right? This so now talking about rethinking about a solid structure to an agile structure from an organization point of view. We're talking about now future staff, future proving that you're going to have agile staff. Therefore, you need an agile organization so that nurture the performance of an organization from a well-being point of view, but also from an efficient and an accountability point of view. And that way spur up innovation from an organization. And that's where people wants to work for those kind of organization because they felt that they didn't contribute to their innovation. So that's the kind of the trend that seemed to be bursting there from the industry. So the education is kind of mismatched to that. I said, wow, okay, how can we be
Mm-hmm.
agile, learning? So that's where that you need, instead of having a solid school or structured school, you need an agile community where the learning is in it. So we're totally in the process of redefine and redesign what is learning within an organization and understanding our role. So now you got staff that prefer to do itinerant teaching. But the other staff, they want to be part of the organization because of their professional identity. They feel to be part of this. So we're in lingo to have a better understanding what's going to be the new organization structure, right? So that's where that is second book of Dr. Kelly, about this new super organization that's our agile, bring a lot of content of reflection on how that we can adapt and adopt this new world.
Is it? Thank you for that, Dr. Chaisson. Is it counterintuitive in some ways? How do we create this sea change and make it sustainable today, Dr. Kelly?
That's so good.
Oh, well, yes, indeed. So the first thing is this will not happen overnight. But COVID has been a paradigm shift in that sense, but it still won't happen overnight. So what I explore in my book is really what I call three phases of how you can set about transforming or reinventing organizations. And one is an immediate phase. You can begin to put new structures and new thinking pretty immediately. And that's about taking individual interventions or opportunities and doing them in a different way. So, for example, in a classic training scenario, the talk and chalk should be out of the window, and we should be thinking more about open education and how we create a co-facilitative, co-creative dynamic in spaces, and that's quite an immediate fix. But then you go on to the next kind of stage, and that's a longer term, maybe 5 to 10 years, where you begin to you have to do some restructuring of the organization and some mindset thinking, and begin to introduce technology to help work this idea of co-creation. Because we have to remember that in the past, the reason why co-creation or co-working didn't really work so well is because you never really had a way of pulling all these very diverse thinkings together. Technology does that, and we need to embrace that. And in the longer term, 10, 20 years, I talk about a swarm organization. And a swarm organization is one which is completely reinvented. And there is really no concept of strong leadership. Everyone is a leader in this organization, and everyone is following their paths and their patterns, but they're doing it through enabling technologies.
Fascinating, Dr. Kelly. You just sparked a thought in my mind. I'm so enjoying this conversation, and we always like giveaways for our conferences. So besides your book, I'm gonna give some really nice honey. Like, you get, how many mugs do we have? How many water bottles? I'm gonna give a nice jar of honey as a symbol. As a symbol, right? And I might put a on it from Mindshare. So perhaps we can arrange to have you speak at this. I think, thank you for the introduction, Dr. Chaisson. I think this would be great conversation to have you speak, whether we can get you to Montreal. Hopefully, the endemic will be upon us, and we can have you fly over. I think this is such a critical conversation to be having in this current era that we're in, to give perspective from an outsider to help us transform and be agile and sustainable for the future of education, for the betterment of our world. Because without a thriving and successful education system, it's the lifeblood of a community, city, town, country. Education is the lifeblood, and that's why we're so passionate about it. And I can't think of a more passionate person than Dr. Chaisson. Dr. Chaisson, share your thoughts as we prepare to wrap up on this.
Yeah, very good. Just one last word is that I never realized that there were 5 evolutions that explain the mismatch of the education system to innovative societies. And one of those 5, it was the evolution of leadership. At every evolution of technologies, we had a new type of form of leadership that we had to promote and we have to do as a behavior. So with that being said, to your point, Robert, we got a huge challenge in front of us. And that new courageous leadership, it is that swarm leadership. It's about connectiveness. It's about responses for that. So thank you for the great opportunity, Robert.
This has been excellent. I'd like to give Dr. Kelly the final word and perhaps share with us as well what gives you hope for the future.
Well, Robert, I really love your idea of this jar of honey, because I think you're right. Because I'm thinking this through, and I'm saying, because the honey is the end product of an industry of swarm activity, where there is not one leader in place, but a collective endeavor. And that collective endeavor has produced this remarkable, natural, beautiful, vibrant substance called honey. And if we could translate that to industry or to education, boy, if we could become swarm organisms and collective superorganisms, boy, we would be in a remarkable place.
With that, thank you so much, gentlemen. That was Dr. Richard Kelly on his new book, The Nature of Business Transformation, along with Dr. Mario Chaisson from the Franco Said School Division, EdTech leader and visionary. My name is Robert Merdlacci, the Mindshare Learning Report. Be sure to check out www.mindshare Learning to get your latest issue. And until next time, stay healthy, stay safe, and keep the learning curve steep.